front of them, but if you look at the combined operating budgets and apportioned fixed costs, the town versus school, right? In FY 2004, 59.95% was school and 40% was town. And then over the 05, 06, 07, and getting to 08, we're at 62.83% schools and municipal 37.17%. The school is definitely growing at a rate faster than the town in terms of the ratio. We've talked, people have talked about the 60-40 ratio, and you can see where that is and where it's going. What was your last question?
The last question was that I don't believe that your presentation really looked at school or town needs over the next 3 years, although we're talking about a 3-year budget.
Okay, well, and that's a fair question. In terms of town needs, in terms of employees, and what we've looked at.
Both town and school.
It's in there, and the school has looked at it too. I think I went over the proposals of what they wanted to add. Now, that's not capital needs, if that's what you're referring to. We're talking about the operating budget, not the capital.
Right, operating budget.
Right. The capital budget, at our October town meeting, hopefully we will have some of the money from the Berry Center, and we can start to play catch-up with some of the capital programs that we've let go for the past 2 years. We'll be talking about that, but there's nothing in free cash for this town meeting that we can really apply to any of these programs. So that's where we are.
Okay. Thank you.
And with the very cash coming in, I don't think we need to put into an override monies to supplement some of the capital that we might want in 2009 and 10. I think we may have that covered.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Mr. Derek, can you elaborate on what the capital budget means and how it's different, how it's funded, and what the requests are from the various departments and what we can expect to see funded?
Typically, the capital has been capital budgets, except for small cap, which is supposed to be embedded in the operating budgets. The funding from that has come from exempt bonding in large projects like schools and modulars and things like that. It's come from debt service that is part of our fixed cost for other items. And it comes from free cash. Now, free cash is generated by the money that's left over at the end of the year, most of which is not because operating budgets haven't spent all the money. Most of it comes from the fact that the revenue forecasts that are used have to be a little bit on the conservative side. Because if, for example, if certain fees don't come in, then we could have a budget shortfall. So it's prudent to manage the revenue forecast of that kind of money that comes into town. And whatever is left in surplus then goes into the general fund over the course of the year. We can't use it until it's certified in at the end of the fiscal year. And then typically that comes in September. We keep our fingers crossed that we have that certification from the state for October town meeting. You might recall last year there was $1.7 million in free cash, but a piece of that was the Neswick money that was coming back to the town. It was put into a stabilization fund for our waste management. And then the balance of the free cash, we put some in. Help me, Mike, what did we do with it all?
Last year's?
Yeah.
I don't think we put anything in stabilization.
No, we didn't put any in stabilization. I'm trying to think of what we did with it.
There was a unmarked cruiser.
Additional
Am I 1 year off on the 1.7 million? That's what it is.
No.
No.
No. No.
Right.
I thought the question was, what are we asking for this year on capital?
No, I think she asked the question of, where there's, how do we handle the capital?
Well, I guess
Am I answering your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to make sure people understand, because it's taken me a long time to understand that the capital budget is completely separate from the monies that you're talking about right now.
That's correct.
And that they, if I have this if I understand this correctly, they could be one-time expenses? Is that
That's
true?
right. The idea is, if you take free cash, that's a one-time thing, and you put it into your operating budget, right, guess what happens next year? You don't have that, and therefore you have a bigger hole. You know, so the general practice has been to take that free cash and apply it to, you know, capital items that you buy infrequently, but you know, it could be, we've had this debate, for example, about the police cruisers, that because we replace them every year, we really shouldn't buy them out of the capital budget. They should be part of the regular budget, because every year we need to replace a couple of police cruisers. Right? That's why you heard us talking about that tonight, and those being removed to balance the budget.
Bob,
Yes.
just a point of clarification, on the capital expenditures. They don't have a direct impact on the operating budget, but they certainly have an ongoing impact on it, in that the debt service comes out of the operating budget in subsequent years. So that if you fund a capital project with a bond, then that's got to be paid back in whatever the period is that debt's got to be repaid. And that's going to be one of your fixed costs in out years. So it does have an impact on the operating budget.
Any other questions?
Well, you touched on this, but for clarification purposes, if the override passes and the levy limit goes up in 3 years, that doesn't mean in the future, in the third year or any year after that, that we have to tax to the levy limit. I mean, we can tax below that. It just gives us the opportunity to tax at that rate. If there were additional revenue, changes in operating procedures for some reason, the fact that we raise the levy limit by an override doesn't mean we have to tax to that limit.
That's correct. In fact, it would, you know, it would have been prudent management if we could have managed to keep below the levy limit, so if we have a bad year, we can, you know, raise the taxes
But
to
the
it, but
override
that's long gone.
the override passing doesn't mean for all time that we necessarily are going to tax the levy limit, although the
No,
way
in
it's,
fact, I tried to imply that, in fact, with prudent management and maybe some good luck, we might end up in a situation where raising the levy limit on a 3-year plan could last us 4 years or 5 years. It would be our responsibility as part of an agreement, though, to make sure that it lasted for the 3 years. And what we're dealing with here is, the way I look at it is, does the community trust the board sitting here this evening to manage that by raising the levy limit for 3 years? And then budgeting and controlling the budget. That you do have a say, because you go to town meeting to vote the budget. But we all know that the vote at town meeting doesn't necessarily parallel the vote at an election. So it's a little bit of a trust. Now, if we vote and override for 1 year, the fact that we're presenting a 3-year plan and showing you what wants to be done, you know, we're identifying the fact that, you know, next year if we do a 1-year override, it looks like we're going to end up having to come back here again. Unless some miracle happens, and I don't see that on the radar screen at this point. Anybody else? Yes.
I had a question about the source of that 450,000 number you were using for the average house in town. Is that market value or assessed value?
That would be assessed value.
And is that an accurate number or a rough number?
It's a number that I picked that seemed to be, you know, the number that's been thrown around somewhere between 450 and 500, and I picked a number.
Because
I mean, you can go look at, if you look at your tax bill, you can tell exactly, you know, what your assessed value is. And
well,
from
I'm
that, you can.
thinking more that if this is going to be part of a presentation to town meeting, that you know, if you don't have a figure where you can point to exactly how it was derived, you're going to have people coming up with their own figure, which
We could
may become
easily,
higher or lower. But I think if you're gonna use it as a point of reference, that you probably wanna be able to show how it was derived, so people know where they stand.
We could easily provide a little formula that they could, you know, multiply, divide, or whatever into their assessed valuation off their tax bill.
That 450, Bob, is pretty accurate in relation to the average assessed valuation of a home right now in town of North Reading. It's within $5,000.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Jones.
For what it's worth, this is my factoring. It costs roughly $37 per $1 million on 100,000 house value. So if you take the $1.5 million and change they're asking for, it comes out to about $56.75 per 100,000. So if you have a $200,000 house, multiply by that 2. If you have an 800, multiply it by 8. They happen to pick 4.5, so 4.5 times the 56 and change comes roughly to the 255 that you see on the handout or the floor book. But if you use that 56.75, you can factor it on whatever your own personal valuations are. To get a rough number, plus or minus $10.
What it's derived from is 37 cents across the entire town generates $1 million of additional tax revenue. 37 cents on the tax rate.
The reason I ask is that probably most people in town can't find their bill and they aren't gonna know their own assessments. So the number they're gonna think about is whatever average number you use. And, you know, granted, it may not be accurate for a lot of people, but it's gonna be the number that a lot of people are gonna be thinking about this in reference to.
We could probably reference it as a percentage of your existing tax bill as the increase and be safe. That would be probably the easiest thing to do. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Has the town selectmen figured out a committee or started to make an initiative toward combining group buying insurance with other towns? I mean, we've increased this by 56%, our insurance for town employees. That's huge. A lot of companies are going out and they're purchasing together. I mean, I think that the towns need to do that. We need to research that in a big way. That's where a lot of our new debt is coming from.
Greg, you want to explain the whole insurance process to everybody?
Yeah, just for clarification purposes, the town participates in a group insurance program that's offered through the Massachusetts Municipal Association. And I can't tell you the number of communities that are involved in that pool, but it's in excess of 100 communities, and that's who we do insure through. Unfortunately, municipal workers tend to be a bit older. Our group is a little bit older, and so when our ratings come in and our increases come in, they reflect the fact that we've had some sicker employees or families that may have been hit with particular illnesses. And so although we are able to take advantage of a pool, our bad experience does come back and hurts us a little bit. The second question that you raised is what can we do? And North Reading and all cities and towns are unique in the sense that we have Massachusetts law that treats us differently than private sector employers. And what it says is that if we're going to change anything in our health insurance plan, if we're going to go from a $5 deductible or $5 copayment on office visit to a $10 copayment on office visit, we have to negotiate it with our unions. And unlike the private sector that can make changes and have flexibility, municipalities are limited by state law that says you have limited flexibility. We can do some things and we want to do things. As a matter of fact, we were looking into the issues right now, but we can't react as quickly as private sector employees do to changes in the market. Unfortunately, that's a reality. That's how the law was passed many years ago.
And do you have to wait for their contracts to come up, or can you go and talk to the?
No, the town, there's a group called the Employee Advisory Committee, and we have a meeting with them at the end of this month to begin discussions similar to what I had suggested earlier. So, but there is a very deliberate process that we have to go through, and we intend to at least begin those discussions right now.
Thank you.
Yes. Deanna?
How long, and what's a realistic